and a lot of these queer people were respected by the community and even given special responsibilities or considered to be spiritually enlightened, and given special religious and spiritual responsibilities as well. And some were even viewed as deities. For example, the Mahu people in the in Hawaii, but that's not our ancestors, so we're not exploring that right now. Um, okay, let's move on to the next slide. Boom. Okay. Um, and today, um, as a result of queerphobia and the strict adherence to the gender binary being imported and enforced, we still see the drastic negative effects of that import of Western queerphobia. This is an image of LGBT plus protesters who, I don't know how many of you might know about the NSAS movement in Africa, but basically, there's a lot of police brutality there, and the police are more or less they're well abusing power, as is common of the police, and they're killing people, and so naturally there is a general social uprising against that. And this is a protest against this is an NSAS protest, and these are queer people protesting because queer lives matter. And there are stories of persons such as these who are queer people who attended those protests, and they were not only ostracized but also physically and verbally attacked. And the end goal of the NSAS movement is for the government to shut down the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which does the police basically, because they have too much power and there's no way to control them. They work outside of the bounds of law, more or less. And these queer people are more or less being oppressed in a movement against oppression, which is not only ironic but extremely dismaying. And in the UK and a lot of European nations, LGBT plus people have made many strides towards social equity and social equality for themselves and gaining human rights. But in places like Africa, India, wider Asia, and the Caribbean, especially the Caribbean, we still face the negative effects. We as queer people still face the negative effects of the colonization of our bodies and the Western powers retaining control of queer bodies and queer identities and not allowing the liberation of queer people. It is still homosexuality is still a criminal offense in 70% of Commonwealth countries, and the Commonwealth is countries that were once under British rule. 69 states criminalize same-sex relationships, and almost half of those states are in Africa. Out of the 53 countries in the Commonwealth, and those are 69 states in the world that criminalize same-sex relationships. Out of the 53 countries in the Commonwealth, 36 have laws that criminalized homosexuality. Um, in July 2020, that's last year, Sudan repealed the death penalty on consensual same-sex sexual acts. And Germany last year, I believe, became the fourth, country in the world to ban conversion therapy for LGBT plus people. I believe that recently, this year, in the UK, conversion therapy was banned, and just recently, I think maybe in the past 2 or 3 weeks, in Canada, conversion therapy was banned. Oh, and marriage equality only exists in 28 member states of the United Nations. Yes, and Costa Rica was the last country to legalize same-sex marriage. And they were the first country in Central America to do so. Okay, more gay facts. 34 member states of the UN have recognition for same-sex partners. And the most recent of those being Monaco and Montenegro. And as of December last year, 81 UN member states have laws that protect LGBT plus people from discrimination in the workplace on the basis of sexual orientation. We are not one of those countries. But 20 years ago, there were only 15 countries with those laws. So, hopefully someday soon. And we will talk more about discrimination in the future. Well, just now, like very soon, in a few minutes, actually. So now we are going to talk about the great Mr. Colin Robinson, who was a queer man who had a vast impact on the LGBT plus community, specifically men who love men and HIV positive men who love men in the world, and mainly the US and the Caribbean, and mainly New York and right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And on the screen, as you can see, is an image of his books of poetry. You Have Your Father Had Head, which was released in 2016. Yes. So let's talk about, and he unfortunately passed away in March this year. So yes. Okay, so we're gonna talk about him. He was a pioneer for organizing. He was a pioneer organizer in LGBTI communities of color in the US in his time spent in the US. And he served on the government planning and advisory bodies while being an undocumented immigrant for over a decade. He co-founded the Audre Lorde Project, which is an organizing center, in 1994, and co-chaired the board of directors of the international human rights advocacy group, Outright International. A lot of his advocacy throughout his life was directed at policy to support and aid people living with HIV in the Caribbean and the US. And this came as a result of him losing a partner to HIV related complications. He led Caribbean Pride in 1998, and for very long time afterwards. And he helped put a big soca truck in the Manhattan LGBTI Pride Parade and organized a historic 1999 reading of the Diasporic Caribbean LGBTI Writers. In 2000, he was a Grand Marshal of Pride celebrations in Brooklyn. He wrote columns for The Guardian about various topics, and he was a great writer. He founded CAISO, which is the coalition advocating for inclusion of sexual orientation. And he, when speaking about his aims for achieving social equity and humanitarian protections for LGBT plus people locally, he said, I hope, well, in reference to the EOA, and we'll talk about that later, the amendment of the EOA, he said, I hope politicians won't cheat me out of all three, but I do plan to haunt Terrence Dial Singh. And that is in reference to the three, how do we call them? I'll explain a little bit later. Another person of extreme importance in our community who we have lost was Mr. Raymond Chukong, who was an actor, a director. I'll let you all read what's on the screen. And we will very soon have a meeting. I just wanted to say that when the meeting ends, y'all can just rejoin using the link, same link. So yes, and I'll be here waiting. And very soon we will have a QTTT meeting where we will explore the literary and dramatic works of various queer persons of importance locally and maybe of the wider Caribbean. So y'all could look out for that soon. If anybody has any questions about anything or any comments to make, y'all can always place them in the chat. Yeah, or if you would like, you can. I think everybody is able to turn on their mic and speak, so that's always an option if you'd like as well. So yes, Mr. Raymond Chukong was an icon in the theatre world locally, and I am an actor, and I hold a vast admiration for many persons, for everybody in theatre. Well, not everybody, but most people in theatre. I love theatre icons, and he was known for produced a lot of theatre, was responsible for a lot of theatre, a lot of brilliant theatre, a lot of brilliant comedic theatre. Brilliant man, very kind and hilarious. And his death was extremely okay. Yes, it was an extremely painful experience for both the LGBT plus community locally and the theatre community, and where those would have intersected as well, because queer people love theatre. And these are some people. Hi. Somebody speaking?
Yeah, I was to know.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You
Are
hear me
you?
now?
Yes, thank you. Yes, perfectly.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to know how he died.
Oh, he was the victim of a murder, actually.
That's unfortunate. Like, who would, anyways, that's unfortunate. You.
Yes, it was very unfortunate. Um, these are two beautiful women who are still with us and um have had they've been very important in the furthering of in the bettering of the queer experience locally. Um, Miss Brandy Rodriguez. Yeah. I really lost my ability to speak for a second there. Miss Brandy Rodriguez um is a trans woman who she was 1 second. I just need to get my facts in orders. She was named this happened this year on the international. I really not remembering my I think somebody's in the waiting room. My what do you call them? Acronyms. Yes, I'm not remembering my acronyms right now. But is the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. That's what it is. And the Queen, like that's the Queen of England, named her a point of light, and is that is a title that goes to people, members of the Commonwealth, people who are citizens of Commonwealth states who have vast impacts on bettering the lives of people who exist and working towards rights for people who exist as members of the Commonwealth. Um, and then we have Miss Joelle de Souza, who is a hairdresser, and she has actually what was the talk about? Oh, she has run for a political position. She did not win, but she ran for it, and it was a landmark occurrence because queer people don't really. It was quite. How do I put it? Um, it was extremely positive as an occurrence of visibility for LGBT plus persons in society, especially trans women. Because we know that as a society, people have a lot of negative opinions towards trans women, and trans women are quite commonly victims of violence. And so, for a trans woman to be seen in a very positive light is extremely, extremely gratifying. Um, and now we have with us a giant. We have Miss Faye. So I will mute my mic now and let Miss Faye tell us a bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Um, a giant. I hope I can stand up to that. But no, I have been working in the field as an activist, sorry, for over 30 years. And this was back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, when the LGBT community here decided enough was enough, and lots of people were passing as a direct result of HIV and AIDS. That came up was to start an organization, and there was born the Lambda community of Trinidad and Tobago. what we did quite often then was more support and try to figure out how we can move the needle and change things and make lives better for the community. Um, but it was young and it was new, and a lot of people, say for instance Jeffrey Stanford, who we've lost, he died, he passed on. Godfrey Seeley, those were a lot of people that were pushing the needle, that did it in, you know Godfrey would do it in his place. He even stood up to the police with regards to using what curse words, and curse words and the use of it in public is against our laws. So he had it in a play, one of his plays. I'm not sure if it was in one of our sons is missing, but anyway, it's one of his big plays, and he was actually arrested. Police arrested, um, and some of the actors with regards to using it, but he stood his ground and he had to, and they dropped the case. So we, Raymond Chukong, who you mentioned, he was running what was called the space. This was in Breton Hall, and he allowed us. This is where he would put on his plays, and he had a little bar before when he had his plays that people could get some refreshments, and he would allow us in to his place on a Saturday afternoon between 3 and 6, and we would sit with each other, and we, the community, would get together face to face. Before this, the only time we really got together was at the many parties, and there was always a party on. There was no weekend that passed that it did not have a party. And it's sad today that we don't have that type of gathering. I mean, the parties did fill a need that we have. And at this point in time, I don't think there are any safe spaces that gay people could gather, with the exception of the internet, as we are doing right now. So Raymond would let us know. We would sit and we would discuss the topics. We would discuss topics such as coming out, what it was like, where you can get support. Some older person could talk to a younger person could ask a question, anything that they're feeling. And there was a sense of family, because quite often people didn't have, uh, well, I mean, the internet was nothing back then. It was probably now coming on. We didn't have mobile phones as they are now. So this connection was very, very meaningful to for us young people. And yes, I was young then, coming into the world and trying to find who you are, who you want to be, and to try to set out a path to how you can live a life that people told you are not right, sickening, ill, and so forth. So back then, while we may not have fought the fight that we were doing, it started laying the foundation for what exists now. Back then, people were attacked on the streets. There were stories of people being knifed. There were stories of people leaving parties and being attacked, um, just beaten and so forth. But it's not like it is today, where we have on record at the moment. I'm just trying to get some names up here on the screen. Uh, you talked about the murder of Raymond Chukang, but there are other names: Joel Mentor, Roger DeVatile, Gregory Singh, Bevan James, Kelvis Ronnie, Mark Anthony Singh, who's another recent one, and of course Sasha Fierce. And we, Pride TT and Trans Coalition, has started a memorial in her name. And these are just some of the names of people that lives were cut short, and they're unresolved, as a matter of fact. Now, there's been talk about similarities in how some people's lives were taken, stabbings, and then there talk about it being um, someone who's preying, or some people who are preying on the LGBT community. yes, we make soft targets, and I want young people and the older heads to think about this. We have been taught to be separate. We are usually very secretive about what we do because we know how risky things are. But I want people to think and bear in mind that you have the support out here, you have the community, just reach out for it. You also have friends and family who may accept you. Please be careful with what you do and think about being the support there. Colin Robinson and KSO started a program about safeguard your brother. I can't remember the exact name for it, but we need to do more of this to be able to save each other some problems or violence that we may face. Just yesterday, a young lady reached out to me after seeing me on the program Gael to advise me that she was going to the police yesterday as her barber had fondled her, even though the gentleman is well aware that she's part of the LGBT community and she's made it known that he still went ahead and fondled her. The rest of society does not think that we are worthy of the human rights or the fact that we are just a person and that we own our bodies and that our bodies are not anybody else's own. And they continue to want to treat us and choose to treat us. It's time that we continue the work and stand up, but do it within a particular manner that does not endanger yourselves. And we need to come together because we're not going to make the changes that we need and want to see as individuals. We have to come together. The entire community has to come together. We want the same thing. We may agree on that. We may disagree on how best to do it. However, the visibility about us seeing folks seeing us as a large community, because we are a large community. Yes, we're quite invisible, but if and when they do see us, all of us come out in such a manner, and I'm not talking about taking risks. I'm talking about you can change things by um, making the point here and there. If there's a survey that comes out, even if you don't want to put your name on something or you don't want to put your face out there because it might be dangerous, you can take part in the surveys. You can help donate $20 a month, can go a very long way to putting out there the support services that we need to getting to protect those who are on the front lines. So let's talk about the work that was done. You mentioned the EOA. When the EOA was first brought to Parliament, and they suggested that we have an Equal Opportunities Act, myself and some friends who were or had the second organization in Trinidad and Tobago, it was called GET at that time, Gay Enhancement Advocates of Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, we registered as a company. We wrote into the government because the government asked for NGOs and CBOs, community-based organizations, to advise them of what they would like to see. And we were the first persons to talk about adding sexual orientation as a ground of discrimination that should be made illegal. So yes, Colin and Kaiso continued that role. And Colin actually mentioned it in a couple of his writings as you talk about it. But since then, and we're talking about over 30 years, that our government still has not done anything positive. And the three grounds that we're asking for, that Colin and they have asked for, HIV and AIDS, ageism, and sexual orientation to be added as grounds for discrimination. Our act at present discriminates, is an active legislation that discriminates against sexual orientation and thereby by that the LGBT community, because it specifically says that sexual orientation is not a ground within this act. The body that advises the Equal Opportunities Commission and the commission itself has on numerous occasions approached the government asking them to change that and to add it to be able to protect folks who have lost their jobs, lost housing, or are prevented or taken advantage of within our society that tends to want to tell us how we should live our own lives when we are not hurting them in any which way, form, or fashion. So the work continues. I don't like to think of myself as a giant. Um, Sometimes I look back and I think, yes, I've seen the work, I've seen how much is done, but um, sometimes I feel uncomfortable with those names because people like those that I just called out that get killed, that's problematic for me. It really and truly impacts me. And when I see younger persons having so much struggles to accept something that that that's part of them that they can't and don't know where it comes from and have nowhere to turn, that is problematic for me because I know how difficult it was for me to be okay with who I am. And it's still very much a process because things are very dangerous for us outside. It may not be as bad as it is in some places of Africa and India, as you've talked, where people are killed, the police brutalize them. How many offices, LGBT offices, have been raided and burnt, and all their files are taken, and the use of the media to out people and make them extremely dangerous. How many women, gay women, have been raped and brutalized in the belief that a good dick can make them straight. So yes, we have a lot of things, and that happens here in Trinidad and Tobago. We hear the cases too. But we continue to do what we need to do, and we first have to do what I think Pride TT and the other organizations are doing, which is while we're trying to push the work, we're also supporting people to have a better life. It's a lot of work that you don't really see happening. And people will say, oh, well, I don't hear about CAISO, and I don't hear about AGD, Alliance for Diversity and Justice. I don't hear about Silver Lining. Silver Lining has done a lot of work over the years with young people. And again, it came about as a result of a young man who thought it was best to take his life and make it a lot easier than to put up with the bullying that he was faced with. There's other organizations. Tobago just formed their association. We have South groups, and now here we have this very young group of people like yourself, Queer Team TT. I think that's what you call yourselves. Getting together and recognizing that there's so much to be done and we all can do it, and doing a wonderful job of putting something like this on today. I don't know if anybody has any questions for me, but I think I'll stop there right now. Is there anything else anybody would like me to say before we go on? Hello? Any questions? Okay. Handing over to our host.
Thank you. So are y'all sure y'all don't have any questions? Y'all can capitalize on this opportunity.
I would
Y'all can put them in the chat if you'd like. Oh, yes.
I just want to mention one other thing. On the July the 19th, Pride TT has organized an event. It's a premier, one of our premier events that we've had for the last 4 years. We've had four. It's called Generation Gap. It's where we put, like I am right now, elders within our community, and they're elders not just because of their age, but because of their experiences on the podium, and for them to share with younger folks what their experience has been like um, to grow up and navigate, or since their discovery of their sexuality to where it is now, where they've probably set up careers and so forth. So I'd like to invite everyone on this to join us on July the 19th at 7:21. And the reason it's 21 because it's 2021. Yeah, 7:21. You can check out Pride TT's webpage to get the link to sign up for the Zoom meeting. You're all welcome. There, you could think about any question you might have. You could put it out there, and I'm telling you, they put those on the podium are very interesting individuals. Not only that, Pride TT is launching. I think you may have seen it. We intend to make this generation gap more than just a one-time meeting. So you will hear more about it from then on. That's it.
Thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you for the welcome. I am sure a lot of us will be there. I just wanted to add a little bit of information about Miss Brandy. And then I will because there's a question in the chat now. So I'll just say that Miss Brandy also is, I'm not sure of her. Okay, she is the director of 3TC. I'm not sure if anybody remembers when I mentioned 3TC last week, but that is the Trinidad and Tobago Transgender Coalition. She is the director of that. And she works, okay, let me just admit this person, yes. She works towards a lot of things, and I'm gonna name some things now. So, well, naturally LGBTQ plus rights, HIV awareness, humanitarian work generally, and well, of course, advocacy for transgender people specifically. And now,
Specifically, transgendered women.
yes, thank you for that correction. Okay, would you like to answer the question in the chat now? Can you see it?
Yes, the question asked, in case
Okay.
folks haven't seen it, is what advice would you give to young persons with a passion for LGBT advocacy? The first thing I would say is attach yourself to an organization that is doing the work that most interests you. That could be Silver Lining, where they specifically treat with younger folks, or it could be the Alliance for Diversity and Justice, or it could be us, Pride TT. But that's where it starts. You get a head start, and then you get into figuring out, and I'm sure they will introduce folks into how and what the advocacy work entails. And that could be, advocacy is everything. It is not just being a lawyer or challenging the laws. Advocacy and activism is as simple as you being yourself, or taking the risk and the chance to correct somebody who makes fun of gay people, or when you're sitting around your lunch table or in school and somebody makes an off remark with regards to somebody's sexuality. All of that is advocacy, all of that is activism. But yes, attach yourself to an organization, and there you can learn um, what it means. Like you can generate letters to any one of your parliamentarians. That's advocacy. You can start off by having a plan, a strategic plan of what you would like to achieve. Um, in about 3 years or so, maybe more, we're going to have another general election. Would you like to see an out person in our parliament? I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any LGBT members in our parliament at the moment, but I'm talking about somebody who's out and who says, Who's going to back Joel? That's part of advocacy and activism also. How do we push those things? That for me is what I say would be the first thing. I see there's another question. Have you seen any major positive changes for the LGBT community over the last 30 years? Hey, we had a public, very public pride parade in 2018. It was huge. 30 years ago, we would have people leave our shores by taking a quick trip to New York or Miami or other places just for pride to be able to walk in the parade. Well, we had our own here. Yes, that's extremely positive change. The fact that we have so many NGOs and CBOs working specifically for the benefit of LGBT persons, that's positive. And it's not as I used to complain about sometimes long time. Years ago, we were divided by our strata in the community, by our status. So the women will not mix with the men. I mean, you had people who had gay women had gay men friends, but it was still separate. We all had our own little world that we live in. And today you would hear people say, I really don't understand what it takes to get the gay women out. The men will be more vociferous in their actions and more outspoken sometimes. But here we have people running us down now to be on the radio programs, to be in the newspapers, offering us or wanting to join and collaborate on the work that we do in trying to get the message out. And the message simply is that we are just like you. There are some differences, but we are human beings. We live our life. We may love persons that are of the same sex, but the rest of our lives. And Colin got that message across so very nicely. They did some t-shirts because the rest of society would say things like the homosexual agenda. And he had t-shirts made for cats that said the homosexual agenda. To buy a cricks, to eat a cricks, to meet with family, something like that. It was just so simple, but it got the message across that we're just like anybody else. And young people are now more involved in organizations that we were able to do before. 30 years ago, it was, I guess, the older heads of the community who had had enough, who were coming out and wanting to form the organizations and wanting to change things before they died, because many were the ones who were faced and facing a shorter life due to HIV and AIDS, or who had been threatened so many times over and over about how, as people would say, you choose to live your lives. Yeah, the only choosing that we folks do is choosing to live full lives and not having to deny ourselves anything as wonderful as happiness. Yes, yes, sir. Write your MP. Yes, that was one of them. Um, Wade informs us that Brandy's main area of work is advocacy for all trans and non-binary people, not just trans women. Um, so I will stand corrected there, even though I remember having a conversation with Brandy about what their mission and vision was, but I stand corrected. By Cricks, yes. So yeah, there's a lot that has been happening in 30 years. I mean, we couldn't, okay, so we didn't have Zoom, but we struggled. And then 10 years ago, if we went to Parliament with our flags, there would be 10 or 12 of us in front of Parliament. I mean, now we get even more. People come out for Pride. We've had dozens of people. I mean, it was just so wonderful to see 200 plus people at Pride 20, 19, the last time we were able to meet face to face, and we're not battling a pandemic. And it's hoped that come 2022 that we are able to meet face to face and have a huge parade. I would love to see some sections. I would love to see banners. I'd love to have our older folks out. I would love to have people who decide they want to represent any group or desire for that. Oh yes, and of course we have the Scotiabank. Um, who would have thought? Even though we've been asking for it, because I was part of the union, the labor movement here. We've all reached out to unions to ask them to cover uh, and protect LGBT workers. And in many handbooks within organizations, sexual orientation has been added over the years. So HR and other parts of the company cannot discriminate on a worker based on their sexual orientation. Um, the laws of sexual harassment and so forth also protects LGBT persons. You can't make certain jokes, you can't act a certain way to someone based on their sexual orientation because of sexual harassment laws. And even though we may not hear about many cases being brought about under sexual harassment for in protection of LGBT, we do have that is there that can be used. Scotiabank has also this year, earlier this year, allowed their health insurance plan to cover their same-sex partners. There are criteria that you have to fulfill, like you have to be at least 5 years together, you have to name the person, that sort of thing. But it's better than not having anything. You know, they're not asking for them to be married. They're actually recognizing it under our common law in this country. So the laws that uh, cover common law relationships are what they're using to provide these health benefits to LGBT partners. And of course, we have organizations or things like the American Embassy, Canadian Embassy, the British High Commission that has supported Pride, TT, and LGBT organizations, the Canadian one too, for the last few years. And I say last few years, it's been more than 5 or 6 years that they have uh, publicly supported LGBT organizations and the movement. So it's a lot of positive progress. Uh, it's some people might say it's baby step, but it's huge when I compare it to what it was like for me and for the rest of the LGBT community 30 years ago, where people thought the only way that I could live my life is to leave Trinidad and Tobago. And I was discussing it just this weekend. There's a lost generation. There's a lost generation for two factors. We have lost a generation due to folks becoming ill with HIV and AIDS and ultimately passing as a result of complications from it. And the other generation of those who left our shores to seek a better life because they could not do it here. Now we have people here willing to stay and fight, even though they can leave, or those coming back and assisting, you giving up themselves, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge. That's right. We don't need to leave. The aim is to stay. However, if anybody decides that they want to go, you have to do what is best for you. I'm not telling you not to go. As much as we would like to stay, as much we would like for you to stay, it is about uh, what is best for you, because that's what we're doing. That's what the work is for the betterment of those who prefer same-sex relationships. And I'm turning it back over to the host unless there's something else.
Thank you again for answering those questions. Um, if anybody would like to ask anything more, no? Okay. I guess we can move on. Okay. So our next topic is legislation. And so we have made some strides recently, in the past few years towards legal recognitions of humanitarian struggles. And in 2018, we had Mr. Jason Jones and his successful case against the laws that criminalized homosexuality here in this country. And okay, so how it works is that the majority of Commonwealth nations, our laws they have to be regulated more or less by the Privy Council in the UK, well, England. And yes, we have this landmark local victory, but the plan is to I think, oh yes, let me resume sharing. I'm sorry, yes. So now you can see my slides, I believe. Yes. The plan is to, well, Mr. Jason Jones's plan is to take an identical complaint, I guess you can call it, to the Privy Council, and that would form a beautiful precedent that might bring us closer to things such as marriage equality and all sorts of legal rights and protections for LGBT plus people, specifically people who love people of the same sex. I don't think I need to say any more about that. So we can move on to the next thing, which
Hello, can I
is
clarify a couple of things with regard to that ruling? So
okay,
the
no
Privy
problem.
Council, it was the final court of appeal for the state of Trinidad and Tobago when it lost against Jason Jones in Trinidad and Tobago. But the importance of the ruling in Trinidad and Tobago is that it created something called precedence, which means that if anyone else decides to take the state of Trinidad and Tobago to court for the very same reason, it is a fait accompli, which means that the courts will rule in the same favor. So what happened is that the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago decided to use the Privy Council, which is the last court of appeal, but it isn't necessarily legitimately our last court of appeal. There's been an ongoing discussion about Trinidad and Tobago acceding to the rest of CARICOM's practice of going to the Caribbean Court of Justice. So unfortunately, Jason Jones now has to find the money to also represent his issue because the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago has gone to the Privy Council.
Thank you so much for that further explanation and clarification. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about the EOA, the Equal Opportunity Act. That does not include sexual orientation, age, and well, specifically what KAISO, what I mentioned earlier, is looking towards is for protection against discrimination for people who have a positive HIV status, but the inclusion that would be named in the Equal Opportunity Act would be age. So yes, those three things are age, LGBT plus status, and health conditions generally. So the aim is to have the Equal Opportunities Commission, I believe it's called, include in a revision of the Act those three things so that instances of discrimination against LGBT plus people, for those three reasons, and naturally discrimination against people who have a positive HIV status will disproportionately affect LGBT plus people, specifically men who love men. And so it is of utmost importance that those things become added in the revision of the EOA, in the amendment of the EOA. And that has been a long-standing goal, the amendment of the EOA, and those specific three things of Mr. Colin Robinson. And there are various local organizations, queer and feminist organizations, that are working towards achieving this amendment, and especially KAISU, of course. I think that is as much as I need to say about the EOA. Okay, so let me change my sites. Ooh, let's talk about, oh yes, there are, oh, I think I wanted to add something. Oh, the amendment of the EOA not only would, okay, so I was talking about the EOA. Oh yes, it would not only serve as legislation, not only for legislation purposes, but it would allow for, it would discourage persons from publicly discriminating against LGBT plus people, and behaving in ways that are harmful to LGBT plus people, if that sort of legislation were to be in place. I think that somebody said something about another way, yes, another way that we could go about achieving it, but I do not think they are there right now. So I will continue, and hopefully they would be able to clarify. For now, we're going to talk about Bermuda. A lot of people hold the opinion that not only is it important for not only is it important for LGBT plus people to have legal rights and protections, yes, but it would not necessarily prevent things such as hate crimes and other things, social ills that we would become victim to. And so it's not only of importance to acquire legislation to be put in place, but also we have to work on the social perception of LGBT plus people and work towards becoming accepted by people in society. And so an example of that holding importance in well, a fact where that opinion might be backed is in Bermuda, because a specific couple, there was a legal case where a specific couple, upon winning that case, gained the ability to marry a same-sex couple, and that naturally set a precedent that would sway the law more or less. But when the political party in power changed, they tried to, well, they didn't try to, they repealed the ruling more or less based on a vote, well, a consensus that had happened on the island, where the public opinion had been that people should not be allowed to have same-sex marriages. And so they removed that allowance that had been legally provided to people. So I don't know, that I don't really have an opinion on the perception of social acceptance being of more importance. Well, not more importance, but being of importance over actual legislation that is put in place. But it seems in that case, in that situation, to have been extremely, how to put it, it was effective in the lack of provision of it affected the law itself. And so maybe that is an important thing that we need to do and work on, being social perception and how people view LGBT plus persons. That, I believe, is the end of my presentation for today. So those are my sources. I also read from a post made on the Caribbean Feminist Instagram account about Mr. Colin Robinson, and some posts made by 3TC and Kaisu on Instagram. I think there is something in the chat. Okay. Thank you very much.
I wanted to say that changing hearts and minds takes a very, 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 very long time. Sometimes it's much shorter time, even though it's still lengthy, to go through the legal aspect to try to get change made. But as we have seen with Jason Jones' case, even though the case is in his favor, the laws are yet to be struck from our books. And just looking at the responses of society after he won and when the judgment was handed down, we had young people thrown out of their homes. We had a young lady spat on by a Muslim group. We had death threats. And then we had the religious community who organized themselves. We had 9 of the religious leaders having a decision made, and the media talk about their view on the judgment. So it still has a very long way to go to change hearts and minds. And that sometimes feels as if it is the only thing that matters in the lives of others, because they are directly impacted by things. And they wish that we change hearts and minds by the click of a finger or the wave of a wand, but it isn't that easy. I was listening to something today, and the person said that it was a news report about the Tobago Pride Association that was just formed, and the gentleman speaking said, for those persons who come out, they get less negative feedback than for those who are more closeted. And I sometimes would like to believe that, but I can't. I mean, I won't, because while I might think it's true, it doesn't matter, because I think any kind of negative feedback for anybody, and while you're out, you still get the death threats. We all know who've put our faces on the news, in on the radio, on television, and so forth. You get things up to today underneath the Gael Facebook Live that was run for the interview that I just did. At the end of the week there, we have people asking me simple things like, so you're doing this even though your way of life is not right, or um, men and women get together basically to have children and you can't have children. So what? So the religious right still continues to feed, and we are a Catholic nation, so we still have all the negative things too. And I say Catholic because it's just the majority. So we still have to work on changing the minds, and that will change minds by people being visible, or in their small networks, taking the chance and the risk to say something to somebody when they're being discriminatory. uh, Legal ways work, and we've seen that. We just have to wait for the whole process to play out. We're still waiting on an appeal date for the Jason Jones case. Again, we don't know how long that will take if we get the date. And then again, how long after that we have to wait for the judgment, what that judgment would be. We Before Jason even brought the case, when it was in the preparation state, the community, many were against, many were for, many were on the fence as to whether or not it will work, because we don't know. And sometimes we worry about the impact it will have on persons' lives when you bring other anything in the court. The Guyanese improper cross-dressing laws, that were the case that was brought and was eventually heard here in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean Court of Justice here on Henry Street. Um, these were trans women who were displaying themselves the way their identity told them to, that they were brought up and charged. They won't work in the streets, as the case may be, whatever. But these are the laws that they have on books, that at any point in time, once they're there, somebody could get the brilliant idea of, oh, let's use this, and we could get rid of some of them and lock them away. So yes, we have to fight the laws. Yes, we have to do the visibility. And yes, we have to continue to work in our small networks, trying to change one person at a time. It was I who had put in the chat that there are other ways of doing it. I want people to be aware of something. This year, in October, our government goes in front of a body of the United Nations to discuss their human rights status. And what I mean by that is, you may have heard of it. It's called the UPR, or the Universal Periodic Review. This is a body that was created, or a commission, or a mechanism, is the word I was looking for, that was created by the United Nations, where they bring up each nation, each country, and they have to stand in front of their peers, which would be other countries, to discuss the human rights within their country. It's about how they treat women. It's everything. So how they treat women, what is education like, what they do for poverty, and the list goes on. We have faced the UPR for 2 years, in 2011 and 2016, because each year, each 5 years, each country has, it's every 5 years you come up. So ours is in October. This is where, and the deadline was in March, April, that each NGO or community-based organizations can write a report stating what their view is of the human rights for any of the public that they work to benefit. And CAISO got together with many organizations and did a submission in 2016. And I think KAISO with one other organization did something in 2011. It is very interesting that many of us don't hear about it, but it's interesting to know that our government has failed to submit reports that they must at the time that they're supposed to, and you cannot find a record of what the government says that their human rights record is within the country. I would tell you that you can go on to the internet and Google the Universal Periodic Review, and you can put in your country, Trinidad and Tobago, and you can see what has been there. But we have been asked on many occasions by many countries to change our laws with regards to, or our systems where we are supposed to provide for persons with HIV and AIDS the meds to bring our infection rate down to whatever levels that they agreed to by a particular date. Our health minister, Mr. Terrence, decided that he is not doing PrEP for anything. I think his words were somewhere to the fact that he's not going to provide medication that would increase immoral behavior or wild behavior. In other words, he's not allowing people to go ahead and have sex and probably risk HIV and AIDS by giving them PrEP. Now, PrEP is something that the world has said can lower our infection rates, the world's infection rates, but our government, our health minister has said no to it. There are many countries who have called for our government here to change our laws and mechanisms and pass the laws to make discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, HIV and age and those type of things illegal. Our government is yet to change the Equal Opportunities Act. So there are parties. There is, I mean, the only thing that this mechanism could do is probably embarrass our government into doing something that they don't want to. And that's the only bite that they have. They really don't have a big stick, but it really looks horrible to other bodies, other countries, and other United Nations mechanisms if you do not fall in line. It may hamper your trade. It may hamper investment into your country and so forth. So those are the kind of things that we need to be involved with as far as our advocacy goes, to ensure that we get the needle moving in the direction that we want it to go. And these are some of the things that somebody asked a question about: how can a young person get involved with LGBT advocacy? And those are type of things that we need to do, that you need to learn about, that by volunteering you could understand and get information that you don't have at hand, learn about things that are available to you. Yes, that is why Terrence is being halted. That is what Colin said. And I really, 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 really think Colin would do it. No, seriously, I worked with Colin for years as part of KAISO and as part of Carry Flags. And when Colin said this, and we had been talking when he was ill and so forth, that that's something I can see could happen with Colin. It may sound weird that I say something like that, but all things are possible.
Thank you again so much for sharing all of that. Again, valuable information. And I hope everybody who is listening will make use of it and actually go forth and, you know, join a local queer org. There are so many and they all do great work. So, you know, and I think we have on our highlights on Instagram the names of most local queer and queer-led orgs and queer-friendly orgs. So, you know, or
And you
if
can
we
have,
don't have it,
and you can have
you
more
can
PE
continue.
sessions.
Yes, that is the plan. To continue, you all could continue coming here and, you know, just because our existence is an act of revolution in the society we live in, and our happiness and our contentment is it is activism. And so, maybe, instead of, well, not instead of, but if you can't, if you're unable to, go out and actually join a queer org, and you could you could just be here and vibes with, queer people and allies, and that's another thing that is positive. So yes, if the queer orgs aren't highlighted, I'll highlight it on the Instagram as soon as possible. So let's talk about next week. Next week we will have some queer mentors coming, some young, well, not as young as the teens, but some young queer people who are going to come talk to us about their lives and how they have um navigated life as a queer person in society here in Trinidad. So that's what's gonna happen next week, same time at 6. Um, so yes, y'all could, as always, reach out to us if there's anything you want to talk about. You could reach out via email or on the Instagram, and you can share with your friends. So now is our usual time where you can unmute your mic or type in the chat and share feedback or ask any questions that you might have. So if anybody would like to share.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for sharing everything today. And this is my first time here, but I really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Thank you, Sabira.
Welcome. Welcome. And thank you for coming. And I hope you come again. Next week is gonna be really fun, I promise.
Yeah, I definitely will be there. So yeah.
Nice. I'm glad you enjoyed today. If anybody else would like to share anything.
Hello, my name is Wade. So I just wanted to say congratulations to you all. It's really wonderful to see young people being so interested in their human rights. And I wanted to encourage you all to keep doing what you're doing. And congratulations on taking time off from social media to join Zoom and actually interact with real people and have real conversations. Take some time, from my experience in the work of human rights, take time to know exactly what your human rights are and use social media to share every single article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights so that you and your friends know what your rights are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. I hope everybody enjoyed and everybody learned something. For the QTT members, in your email there'll be the usual weekly feedback form. If you signed up using our email list, so you could share, so we could know how to move forward, how to improve the experience. And for our guests for today, thank you so much for coming. For the people who shared, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience with us. We really appreciate it as younger persons, and we appreciate the guidance as well. So if that's all, if nobody would like to say anything more, we can proceed to end.